Welcome, and thank you for joining Risk of FAD Transmission to Domestic Swine through Food Waste Disposal and Wild Feral Pig Exposure in Landfills. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. To submit a question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel. Enter your question in the message box provided and send. Alternatively, pressing #2 on your telephone keypad will enter you into the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, then please state your name as well as your question. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time until the Q&A portion of the call. If you require technical assistance, please send the chat to the event producer. With that, I will turn the conference over to Liz Fernandez.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Fernandez with the Professional Development Services Branch, and I'd also like to welcome you to this webinar today. Our speaker today is Andy Femino. Andy has been employed with the California Department of Food and Agriculture for 7 years as a research data specialist, subject matter expert in disposal. He is assigned to the Emergency Programs Unit of the Animal Health Branch. His responsibilities include the development of policy, providing direction and leadership in the development, assessment, communication, and implementation of disposal advocacy through regulatory and stakeholder relations. And with that, I'm going to hand the webinar over to Andy.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. So let's get started. So good morning. I'm honored to be giving the presentation today. I know there's a lot of information on this subject that we all want to know, and we're all looking forward to in further research. This morning I'm going to talk a little bit about ASF transition from potentially infected food waste to feral swine. As an SME in disposal with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, I have my work cut out for me. The regulatory landscape in reference to environmental issues in California are complicated. I think we all know that. And so I've been working hard to build my relationships with agencies such as EPA, Regional Water Board, Department of Toxic Substances, and CalRecycle, who oversees our landfills. So what I found out is they sort of look at us like aliens. They're used to hearing from the refuse partners, but not really from our from the livestock side of the business. So there's kind of a disconnect, but I think we're making a lot of progress, and I feel that we've done a great job in bridging this gap. So this study is a great opportunity to collaborate with our regulatory partners, but also help build a greater understanding to the critical dynamics and epidemiology of livestock disease transmission. So thank you again for being part of this presentation. So our collaborative approach, in response to the lingering threat of African swine fever, so we want to start a study or start looking at the risk between food waste, feral swine, and the landfills. So in collaboration with the University of California, Davis, the CADAMS group, and the Department of Recycling and Recovery, Resource Recycling and Recovery, CalRecycle in California, we're beginning the study. We hope to develop some partnerships in the future. We're still early on with the study and developing it, so we're hoping to secure partnerships with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and USDA Wildlife Services. I think they're going to be critical to the outcome or success of this study. So as we know, the threat of African swine fever to our nationwide population, or swine population, is a devastating reality. So like many other states, California is experiencing an ever-growing population of feral swine. In fact, there are only 2 counties in the state where feral swine have not been reported. Dr. Annette Jones, our state veterinarian for California, recognized the impending risk of ASF transmission through food waste and initiated this analysis to gain a better understanding of the associated risks. Though the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has conducted numerous studies concerning feral swine in California, this will be the first study in the state encompassing feral swine and food waste. So in research, or in summary of the research, we want to look at the characterization of discarded food products from not only from the import side, but also how those food products get to the landfills and moreover the composting sites. So we're going to be implementing a risk assessment to characterize the transit of ASF or possibly contaminated food waste from import to the susceptible animals, which are our either domestic swine and then on the feral swine. So we want to have a secondary focus on the spread of disease and maybe some modeling in here to understand it better in California. Because of the number of feral swine we have in California, this, I think modeling is going to be very important. So we're anticipating a two-year timeline for the study, and hopefully we'll have a better idea of what's going on by the time we're done with that. So as the California Department of Food and Agriculture, we want to use this for the development of surveillance programs. We want to look at mitigation strategies. We want to look at the potential costs associated with livestock disease outbreaks and control methods. We'll do a gap analysis to look at prevention methods. And also, I think, importantly, are the metrics related to the project and effectiveness. I think we want to see how this project allows for maybe other states to take on the same studies. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Beatriz Lopez-Martinez, or Martinez-Lopez, on the line today with us, and she's with the CADAMS group at UC Davis. So they do a tremendous amount of work on ASF, and I'm very fortunate to have her and her group as part of this program to help us study this issue. So we also have, as a collaborating partner, the California Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery. They oversee the landfills in California, and they're going to be an integral part of this study. So hopefully the outcome for the CalRecycle is they'll be able to look at our results and understand how they can change their policies in the landfills to prevent landfill incursion by swine and landfills. Also, they'll be able to look at the areas from the modeling to understand where their biggest risks are for landfill incursion by feral swine. So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, again, I'm adding a slide in. I'm hoping that we'll be able to partner with Fish and Wildlife on this. And hopefully they'll be able to their pig management program biologists will be able to gain some data about the risk of disease transmission through the landfills and maybe where their animals are, where their swine are. So wildlife services, again, we're still working on building this relationship with wildlife services, but again, I think they're critical to the outcome of this process. And so we want to provide, hopefully the outcomes will provide biologists some data related to the transmission and also to the need for changing or maybe modifying or implementing different management approaches to feral swine that are near landfills. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment as we get through further slides. So, when I talk about ASF, we're also looking at all foreign animal diseases, such as CSF and FMDs. And when I look at this picture on the screen, and the reason I put this up there, it just makes this thought almost overwhelming when we're looking at, as we get through further slides, almost overwhelming with the amount of the traceability of products like this that are coming through our ports of entry and through our disposal systems. So we know that African swine fever, there's no vaccine or treatment for it, that it's highly contagious but not a threat to human health. So And we know the only way we're going to stop this disease is through depopulation of affected herds or enhanced biosecurity practices. This leaves us in kind of a more in the mode to look at prevention and surveillance because we know that once it gets here, if it does get here, we're going to be in a different mode. So looking at China and their food waste. So China, we know that China, their African swine fever has come through contaminated table and kitchen scraps as potential sources of infection. We also know that those pork products that were fed to their domestic swine have let ASF pop up in unaffected areas. So China has highlighted the importance of this surveillance, and I think the rest of the world is following suit and trying to look at surveillance ideas as well. So we know that in China that there's 688 million market hogs are processed in China each year, compared to our 125 million in the U.S. So we know that China's 2018 sow herd was 44.5 million, and in the U.S. only 6.1 million sows in the U.S. So China estimates that there's that in 2019 there was 19% or 136 million hog production loss in 2019. When we're looking at that 136 million hog production loss in 2019. That you can see that's well over the amount of market hogs that we even process in the U.S. It's a devastating reality to look at those statistics. So we know that 25% of the pork production is shipped to international markets. We know that the U.S. is the third world's largest producer and the second largest pork exporter, valued at over $4.6 billion. So, so we're looking at an estimated 1 million pigs are moved a day in the U.S., and you'll see why I added the next couple lines here. So 1 million pigs a day are moved in the U.S. That's just unbelievable to think of the amount, if we're looking at modeling the amount of spread that could move without a stop movement. But so we know that the export markets will likely close if that is found in the U.S. and that national stop movement is likely to take place as well. So I think that again highlights the importance of surveillance and trying to figure out how transmission can occur through landfills and all pathways. So in understanding the risk, so I guess one of the questions is the transmission of ASF mitigated food products through international ports, is the incineration process going to stop that? We're going to look at that in this study. Is there risk associated with non-declared food products that pass through airports and shipping terminals and luggage and mail? I think that's a big point. As we go through some more slides, you're going to the next slides you'll see how important that is. And is there risk with contaminated food products being passed through traditional curbside refuse collection and transportation to landfills? So whether we're looking at this is that if a contaminated product comes through or it's non-declared, comes through luggage or shipment into a household, and that those products are fed to maybe domestic swine or go to landfills, and feral swine are able to get to those products in landfills. I think that's specifically where we're trying to focus. So this is a pretty interesting slide here. If we look at the gravity of this, there's over 1 million passengers a day come into the U.S. With 7.7 billion worth of imported products and 95,000 entries of merchandise in our air, land, and sea. That's pretty that's pretty impressive to see how much those kind of imports, those kind of items coming into the U.S. And for the discoveries on a daily basis, 319 pests and over 4,000 materials that are quarantined, plants, meats, animal byproducts. And this is for our CBP people and our USDA, our APHIS partners in helping us control this. I think it's very important. So we're looking at also some interesting information here is that, so according to our partners in epidemiology and animal risk, the assessment team, so the legal entry of swine products is the largest potential pathway of ASF into the U.S. Report inspection and interception data suggests that air passenger baggage and foreign mail are well utilized for entry of illegal products as well. And the most imported product, or maybe it could be non-declared product, I guess we'll have a better idea. This is pork and ham and sausage products are the most intercepted at international border products. And so as we all know that ASF can go, or FADs can go right through those products. So when we're assessing the risk, so the estimated risk of introduction to ASF into the U.S. after the China outbreak started was over 183% increase once outbreak in China. And so most of that risk is, 67% of the risk, in fact, is associated with flights originating from China and Hong Kong, followed by Russia at 26%. So where's the risk? According to 2019 research on 5 airports, and as you can see on this list, that California has 2 of those. And so this is an interesting slide. I think it only goes more to why we want to understand where in California and what landfills we have and the risk they present with feral swine in these areas. So we know that APHIS has controls in place to mitigate the international food waste, and everything moves under their supervision, has moved to improved incineration facilities under seal. So this is we'll be trying to understand this a little bit better, and I think when we're looking from the last slide to this slide, if you look at the swine products and the swine byproducts, that the legal movement is low with moderate uncertainty, but when you get to the illegal movement, which may include the food products that are coming in through the mail or non-declared, I think that's where our risk, in fact, grows much larger. So we're looking down at the regulated garbage, and that it's low, legal is low with moderate uncertainty, but we rely on the qualitative studies by SIA to understand this a little bit better. So the feral swine, and this is, I think, where it gets a little bit more interesting when we start adding this into the ASF mix. So in recent years, the feral swine the populations have gotten larger due to their high rates of reproduction and their capacity to adapt to different environments. So the USDA estimates there are over 6 million feral swine in at least 35 states. So the California wild pig population. So in California, in 1999, there were roughly 42 out of 58 counties that have found feral swine were found in. Now, this is a 1999 study relying on Walkman. So at this point, there's no quantitative data to really look forward. But however, when we go to USDA, and you can see that here now it's much different when we're looking at the swine population across the U.S. And at this point, like I said earlier, if we're relying on this information, that now we have 56 out of 58 counties that are now have feral swine in them. So the study is really going to take on a unique turn when we start looking at feral swine in relationships to our landfills. So we do know that California has experienced incursions of feral swine at landfills. In 2019, Wildlife Services responded to damage at a landfill in the San Francisco area. I didn't put a lot more detail on this as we're still looking at it and trying to understand it better. So once we have that information up, I think we're going to be focusing on some of these areas. But we look back at like the airports, or the previous slides, airports in Los Angeles and our airport in San Jose, which is right in the Bay Area. It only increases our risk factors. So our risk of domestic swine. So we know that feral swine are highly adventurous, and even though that with the GPS tracking, there's still it's been found that there's interaction with domestic backyard swine. We also know that the association with wild pigs and domestic swine presents a risk for transmission of FADs. So this was an interesting slide here. I think it goes to show where we're at and why we're trying to understand feed. So when you look at both the wild boars and also domestic swine, you can see that the kitchen waste and food residues, meat products from infected pigs going to wild boars, and the transmission back and forth. I think this is a great slide to highlight the risk of food products in both domestic and wild or feral swine, and how they interrelate. So our risk to commercial swine operations, we know that there are 65 million swine in the United States, and most are raised indoors. So though our commercial operations are strict on biosecurity, we also know that there's been that in 2013 the PD virus got in through infected feed bags. So the biosecurity in commercial operations is not impenetrable. So we know that this is definitely a possible route, and I think we want to understand that a little bit better, and maybe make suggestions for through surveillance and maybe changes in practices. So my last slide. So we want to know, does the relationship between food waste and feral swine landfill present a non-negligible risk of foreign animal disease transmission? So that is the end of my presentation. I will open it up to, go back to Liz for questions.
Okay. So right now we don't have any questions in the chat panel. Are there any questions in the verbal queue?
To submit a question, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. Also, our chat is open. You can send a message via the chat.
I don't know if the lack of questions is a good thing that I covered all routes, or.
We do have a question in the chat. What sources of data will you use to determine types of high-risk materials are getting into garbage streams?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The question is, what sources of data will you use to determine types of high-risk materials are getting into garbage streams? Like, are there issues in urban, suburban areas with feral hogs and curbside garbage?
No, not that we know of, but I think the data we're going to be looking at is we want to understand, I think, through a basic risk assessment, and before I go farther into the question, I'm going to maybe see if Dr. Martinez-Lopez wants to answer the question. Not all cover it.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so, well, I think that Andy probably can answer this better, but we're looking at many different sources. Definitely, CalRecycle will provide a lot of information about where this garbage is coming from. We try to map all that, but it's kind of challenging probably to do the complete trace back to, you know, what kind of product is this, where it's coming from. We'll see. We have all that information readily available, but I think we can come up with the relatively good trace back till at least retail stores and see what's the origin of the product.
Okay. We have another written question. What biosecurity management activities are newly being implemented at landfills? Do they bury deeper or cover quicker, fencing, et cetera?
Certainly, this is Andy. Certainly, I think that's what we want to understand. We want to understand better. I know that from CalRecycle, they're perfectly willing or want to understand this study better so they can make changes to the landfill. This was kind of new for them. We've kind of highlighted the risk of feral swine to landfills, so I think they're waiting on this data to make those changes or to understand how they can implement better changes to keep feral swine out of landfills.
Another question is, does California have a handle on outdoor pig rearing in the state and the impact the feral swine exposure would have to that sector? And how does California interact with those producers?
Certainly that California Department of Fish and Wildlife has done a tremendous amount of work on this subject, and so I know that they have an understanding of, through outreach and surveillance, and also studies of feral swine in relation to backyard swine. So I think we have a good handle on that. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity for further outreach and further understanding of that pathway of transmission.
Okay. Next question is, will identified high-risk food waste sent to the study landfills be subject to ASF viral testing?
That I can't answer yet. I think we're so early on in the study. I think that's we're going to have to, as we work through the process. I don't want to put Dr. Martinez-Lopez on the hot seat again, but I think we're going to have to try to understand whether it's going to be a viable option in this study.
Okay. Another question is, are landfills in California currently required to be fenced?
That I can't answer either. Even the thing is even if the landfills are fenced and they can have a brick wall, we know that feral swine are gonna push through fencing. So unless they have some kind of fortress-like fencing, I think we're going to try to understand that and look at the risks to landfills, and hopefully, again, make that CalRecycle will make those changes. But I don't know the rest of that if every landfill is adequately fenced.
Okay. Here's another question. Is there an effort to engage in Asian markets and Chinatown venues to make vendors aware of illegal imports and the damage they can cause?
I think I'm going to on this question, because I don't have the data on that. Dr. Martinez-Lopez, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about the current strategies here in California, but can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so there is definitely a lot of outreach. There is an international big group working with OIE and FAO that is increasing the awareness of all people in the pig value chain, not just, producers, but also vendors, dealers, and market suppliers, to be aware of the risk of moving products and so on, mainly because internationally, as you may know, these routes, the illegal movement through passengers and so on, has been considered to be a really important way of disease transmission in Asia, particularly, well, many countries, but all Indonesia, Timor, all the new infected countries that are more than 10 now were likely to be infected through those routes. So I think that it's a really clear threat. In Australia and Japan, in their border inspections, they found contaminated products coming through passengers. So I think they really know that this is a big threat, and they have increased the outreach and communication with all producers and all people involved in the pig value chain. Now, here in California, definitely there is a lot of, I saw in the airports actually, advertisements in Chinese, and there's a lot of people that is aware of this, but not sure about specifically, in Chinatown, for example, San Francisco, if every single person, all the vendors are aware of what's going on. That probably could be something interesting as an outcome, for example, to come up with flyers and to increase the outreach and communication with these folks.
So I have a special guest in the room with me. I have our state veterinarian, Dr. Annette Jones. She's going to.
Right, maybe I can help with some of those questions. I think that the most important thing to remember is the risk that we're looking at in California is very similar to the risk in any other state that has feral swine. And so we were just curious to actually try and quantify to the best degree that we can what, is there a risk? Is this a possible avenue for introduction? The only thing different probably between California and other states is, and there are other states that are similar to California in this respect, is that because of our location and our geographic size, we have a very high degree of foreign travel. So the concern would be that somebody would smuggle a product, a contaminated product, and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol misses it at the airport or in the import, of some sort, then that would be discarded in the garbage, and then it would go to landfill or to organics are composted here or to a compost site. So either of those locations could pose a threat, and then should it get into wild pigs, it's just like in other states, the biggest risk with wild pigs is to transitional swine, and then transitional swine, as much as, commercial producers, swine producers across the country have excellent biosecurity, in general, what we've seen is biosecurity is not always as good as what the owner, believes it is. So there is that risk with common feed, common renderers, common service people, of moving the virus from transitional swine to the more commercial producers. So that's kind of the concern and what generated the impetus behind this study. And what we're hoping is that what we find in California, if this method does help to quantify the risk, maybe it could be looked at in other parts of the country as well. So this is almost a pilot study that we're hoping will help better inform the level of risk through this avenue. I think I tried to answer some of those questions that were asked.
Okay, we do have another written question. Feasibility may be an issue, but do you see landfill contents becoming regulated like cooked garbage would be in places where feeding is legal?
Landfills are highly regulated already in California. I'm certain that's true in other states. I know there was a question earlier about fencing. They are required to have fencing. The type of landfill, it varies from location to location and what they receive, just as if you travel across the country, that would be true with any landfill. So I'm not sure I would see, perhaps what we would do is focus on those landfills that are highest risk to see if there's ways to shore up the biosecurity, as was asked earlier. But for the most part, I think that the useful information would be towards commercial producers so that they understand another threat to potentially to their farms, and they could also take actions to protect them.
And we do have another question. It says, does California catch products smuggled illegally at retail very often? The statement is also, I know that that is what smuggling, interdiction, and trade compliance looks for.
We don't look for that. That would be, I'm not sure who would look for that, but where those illegal, we do in some circumstances look for illegal products and meat products, but we do, I can assure you, illegal products are regularly caught at the border in our various ports, and you know that if you're catching them at the ports, you're also missing them at the ports. So I think we all know that products are getting into this country.
We do have another question. In California, are landfills regulated at the state level or county level?
Both. Is CalRecycle? Okay, so there's a state entity that provides overall oversight, and then it has county level agents that do the active enforcement.
Okay. Do we have any verbal questions in the queue?
We do have one question in the queue. One moment, please. Caller, your line is unmuted. Go ahead.
We had the question answered. Thank you.
Okay.
We have no further questions in the question queue.
And we don't have any other questions in the chat.
Once again, pressing #2 will indicate you wish to ask a question, as well as the chat panel on the right side of your screen is open. To submit a question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send.
So we do have another question in the chat. Do you have any sense of how many states have taken a look at this issue in their state?
That I can't answer. I would like to know that myself, but I don't have that information at this point.
Okay.
None that we're aware of.
Okay. Well, if we have no further questions, I'd like to thank Andy for having the webinar, speaking at the webinar today, and everybody else who was included in the chat and the questions. And we'll be sending out additional announcements for upcoming webinars in the next week. And have a great afternoon, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.